For 2017, Becky and I decided to take the 990 and the 1090R back to some of our favorite spots we'd done 2 years ago on the Idaho Backcountry route, and also some of our favorite spots at Hell's Canyon, and we had a turnaround spot of Beartooth Highway in Montana. Our route is shown with the light blue line. First stop was Athena, Oregon. We were looking for the Odaka Museum, but there was none to be found. First night we stayed in Enterprise, Oregon at the Log House RV Park, and the owners are great, and they host the Wallowa Rally every year. They love motorcyclists. A few years back we came down the Hess grade on the Oregon side down into Hell's Canyon. We wanted to try the Kleinschmidt grade, which went up the canyon into Idaho, and that's what we did. At the bottom of Kleinschmidt grade, you'll notice a sign that says no RVs, no vehicles with trailers, and as you climb up the mountain you'll see why. There's virtually no room to pass, and there's some really tight turns and fairly steep and no protection on the side. It was about 100 degrees down at the canyon where we crossed the Oxbow Dam, and as we climbed it didn't let up, and it was mainly in first gear and second gear climbs, mainly because the very narrow road and nothing to stop you from going off the very steep edge. The road itself was in great shape. You can see there's a little bit of areas where they filled in with some bigger rock, but mostly it's nice and smooth and in really good shape. Dusty, but good shape. For me, there's always a little trepidation about going up into areas like this with Becky behind, even more so when she's on her 990. I know I'm responsible to get us both out of there, and you don't know what to expect yourself, so you just I always say, well, I guess we can always turn around and backtrack if we had to. Being we're out on our own, we carry a lot of spares and items that can help us get out of breakdowns, and we also carry a satellite tracker just in case the worst case we have to call for help. We both have GPSs. Becky likes to ride about a quarter mile behind me just to avoid all the dust, and I don't blame her, and lucky me, I get to be in the front and no dust. Becky will lead sometimes, but she prefers to ride in the back because then she can ride at her own pace and she doesn't feel pressured to go faster as she wants, or that she's holding it. We also have intercoms in our helmets that we talk back and forth, and occasionally I'll get out of range and I'll stop and wait for her to catch up and make sure everything's okay. Here's a good shot of my bike, the temperature on my bike at 98.9 degrees. It didn't get any cooler as we climbed. Spectacular views as long as you were brave enough to look down. You have to keep your eyes on the road though. At this point, Becky started to complain that her bike was overheating, so I pulled over to let her bike cool down. And then she was saying she didn't have any rear back brake. Yeah, it's just because you stopped. Just turn it off, let it cool down.
See what I mean? It wouldn't hold me going up the hill.
Really?
Yeah. I had my foot on. I'm like, am I missing the brake or something?
I was quite puzzled why the rear brake would go out going uphill. So until I put my hand on the little silver master cylinder, and it burned my hand. So I suspected that it was boiling over.
I think we're at the top.
We must be. Was it working on the road?
I thought so.
Well, if we get any steep downhills, I might have to ride your bike and you ride this one.
I can't ride your bike.
Yeah, you can. It's not any higher than that one.
High off the ground.
Sometimes the more experienced rider has to tell the other rider that little fibs like, well, it's just around the corner, or yeah, you can do it. It's not that any taller.
We're in Council, Idaho.
As we climbed out of the Hell's Canyon, we dropped into a little town called Council. And all the way down, I was trying to figure out why Becky's master cylinder was overheating. And I realized that the exhaust headers goes right by the master cylinder. And since it was such a slow climb out of that canyon, it was such a hot day, I suspected that the master cylinder had boiled, fluid had boiled. After leaving Council, we went up through McCall into a little town called Cascade, and that's where we camped the second night. The owner let us camp in his little RV park for $20 and free showers. Can't beat that deal. And it was right next to this Payette River Whitewater Park. The water park had an indoor viewing area / museum, and the trim on the inside was beautiful, all representing whitewater flowing. The town of Cascade is mainly a tourist destination now, but has a rich history of logging. On day 3, we headed out of Cascade and went to one of our destination points, was Deadwood Reservoir. The trip was only 68 miles, but as you turn south, the road was like talc powder. It was about 3 inches deep, so it took a little while to get there, but it was a beautiful campsite. As you can see, we had the place to ourselves. We were so secluded that we didn't even put the fly cover on the tent, so we were able to look at the stars at night. Traveling by motorcycle really forces you to pare down what you're carrying with you. However, I did manage to squeeze in a little fishing pole, and we kind of wished we'd taken our inflatable SUPs, stand-up paddle boards. They roll up rather nice and fit right across the back of the bikes, because this lake was a perfect spot. Next morning we could see clouds moving in from the south, so we were a little worried about getting out of there given the talcum powder type dirt we traveled in on. Of course, in this area we had no cell coverage, but our inReach satellite tracker had a nice feature where you could download local forecast for weather. The forecast called for rain, so we decided to pack up a little early and head south towards Loman. We were on Forest Road 555. We had about 20 miles of this type of road to get down to Loman to the highway, and it wasn't bad. However, we were still dealing with Becky's failed rear brake, and at Loman I asked the storekeeper if he had any brake fluid, and he had some, so he allowed us to pull the bikes down behind the little gas station, and I pumped about half of the bottle through the system and flushed out a bunch of dirty brown old brake fluid. Sure enough, that was the problem. The brakes worked fine after that. After fixing the brake at Loman, we pretty much slabbed it over to a little town called Mackay, and I'd never been there before. I'd never seen Mount Bora. In the town, they also have a submarine conning tower mounted on a concrete pad. It must be one of the first nuclear-powered subs, and Mackay is close to the town of Atomic City, which is the first nuclear-powered town. I think the high school is named the bombers. The next day we headed over to Rigby, Idaho, and visited with Becky's sister Becky and family, Neil, Jason, Ben, Wendy, and Megan. While we were there, we visited the climb headquarters, which was just down the road from Vicky's house. We also got to attend Brighton's birthday party. Brighton is a cutie, and like me, she believes you can never have too many toys or too many motorcycles. The next day we headed up north towards Yellowstone Park. We went in the west entrance, and that's the first rain we experienced on the trip. We buzzed down to see Old Faithful, where we found this young ranger very funny.
I didn't hear a move, please, so I'm still going. It is 2.5 miles above that lava.
Okay, here we go.
It is because of that lava that we found all of these thermal... Maybe. Thank you for your time. Have a wonderful day.
It's nice to see young people enthused about their job. We headed north to the northeast exit of Yellowstone to Cook City. We couldn't find any tent camping, so we found this nice little place in a RV park that had just finished construction on 2 little cabins. The next day we packed up and headed north towards the Beartooth Highway. The Beartooth Highway is a mountain pass that goes up over 11,000 feet, and it's paved all the way. On the route there's a gravel road turnoff that winds its way up to the lookout. The fire lookout station is no longer active, but is manned by volunteers who keep it open for the tourists. There's a little tourist store right at the top of the hill. It's called Top of the Hill Store, and this is a big road bike route. We had a nice chat with them and found out some of them were from Washington also. We were riding the pass in late July, but sometimes I've heard that this pass doesn't open till mid-June because of the heavy snowfalls. Another great little lake we could have paddleboarded on, but I bet you it was cold. asked several people what the actual bear tooth was, and we got several different answers. For me, it seemed that peak that looked like a tooth was a pretty good explanation. You notice I have my down jacket underneath my mesh riding jacket, and I was glad I had it. I never leave home without it. Here we started to head down the other side of the pass, and you can see that the road way down below. And that's where we eventually ended up in Red Lodge, Montana. Here's a picture of me studying the map of where to go next, as we really never planned an exact route. We decided to head up towards Helena. This is a pretty hot day, and we were just going to get a motel for that night. We passed this rather large burned grassland area. Although we didn't know it at the time, as it turned out, this was going to be one of Montana's worst fire seasons. On day 8, we left Helena and headed towards Missoula and Lolo and Waukesha Lodge. On the way, we turned off onto a gravel road to a historic site called the Garnet Ghost Town. It was really interesting and pretty complete ghost town. I know this happens wherever gold is discovered, but it amazes me how far back in the mountains this gold town was from the main big cities of Missoula and Helena.
Belly up to the car.
What do you have? That afternoon we made it to past the town of Lolo. We started out on the Lolo Highway, Highway 12, and we camped in one of our favorite spots is Waukesha Lodge. They let you tent camp there for free, and the showers are $5. Waukesha is a great place to stay because it's right at the beginning of the Lolo motorway, gravel road that splits off Highway 12 and goes 87 miles approximately to Pierce. This is the route that the Nez Perce Indians used to cross the Bitterroot Mountains, and also the route that Lewis and Clark came over on their trip. On the Lolo motorway. Is it motorway or motorway?
I don't know. Motor, I don't know.
It was a little rougher than I remember from 2 years ago, and I got a little worried because of the rough areas with Becky on the big 990 versus the 690 she rode 2 years ago. As it turned out, she did just fine, and she motoed on the motorway. Didn't film the bad portions of the road because I was doing a handhold on the GoPro, and in the bad portions I was actually hanging on. I needed both hands on the handlebars. About midway on this section, we arrived at the Indian Post Office. Up at Indian Post Office, second time on the Idaho backcountry route. The Nez Perce had developed a system by stacking rocks on this pass to communicate with each other.
We made it to Devil's Chair.
A few miles down from the Indian Post Office is a rock formation called the Devil's Chair. There's a small sign next to the road, but to see the eerie Devil's Chair you must walk around a larger rock formation. From here we headed down to Highway 12, and it was about 104 degrees. It was so hot we would stop and I would dunk our helmet and our jackets in the Clearwater River, try to cool down. With no sign of the heat letting up, all we could think of about is a nice air-conditioned hotel room. We stopped in Clarkston and just chilled. The next day we just motored on home, and it was still relatively hot. It is so hard after these trips to go back to work, as you just want to keep riding and riding each day.